The Ersatz modal realism, is an alternative theory to that of David Lewis's modal realism. Under the Ersatzism, there is only one concrete world, but there are a number of abstract entities, or ersatz worlds, that represent alternatives to the concrete world. Only one of the ersatz worlds correctly represents the concrete world correctly. This world is considered the actualized ersatz world. All the other ersatz world are a misrepresentation of the actual world, in other words, what could have happened of the actual world, and they are considered to be unactualized. Not only are the ersatz worlds considered to be actualized or unactualized, but so are individuals under this theory. Unlike modal realism, the ersatz theory distinguishes between what it is like to be actualized and being actual. The reason that ersatzism is more favorable over Lewis's theory is that it agrees with common sense in a number of ways that Lewis's theory does not. Number one, under ersatzism, whatever exists is actual. This follows along with common sense. We would all agree with this. Number two is that there are no more concrete things than what we would think there are. In other words, what's real in this world, we understand it to be real in this world, and we don't think there are any more real things than there are. And in saying this, we would say this is correct when it comes to the extent of what we think is concrete or real in this world. It seems that we avoid all the problems under this, we would think that we would avoid all the problems associated with Lewis's and still get all the gains. Lewis does not agree with this. He divides ersatzism into the three different ways that it can be represented and objects to them in turn. The first one is linguistic ersatzism, the second is pictorial ersatzism, and the third is magical ersatzism. The first, linguistic ersatzism. Ersatz worlds are constructed from words and sentences of some language and are represented in virtue of the meanings stipulated to these words and sentences. The language that the linguist ersatz would use would not be your normal everyday language. Instead, they would have to accept a language that has been enriched. An example of an enriched language would be a Lagdonian language. Under this language, actual things are the names themselves, and properties are predicates that express themselves. For this theory, though, it's inconvenient for them to accept this, but this is an example of a type of language that they would have to accept. Also, Lewis says that this language would have no logical limitations. This would make the language of the ersatz worlds to have maximal consistent sentences and be enriched both descriptively and logically. Now, Lewis objects to this in two ways. Number one, he says that the ersatz world would need a primitive modality because the notion of consistency is a modal notion. Most who believe in ersatzism worlds would accept this, would willingly accept this. It's more like a bite the bullet to get what they want. Lewis's second objection is that even with the enriched language, he believes that it still lacks the descriptive resources to be able to provide as many possible worlds as his theory does. Now, I would maintain that it's very possible that Lewis is just mistaken about how many possible worlds there are. And that this theory could still get it correct. Because, as we said, this theory agrees much more with how we think of what common sense is than Lewis's theory. Now, the second pictorial ersatzism is pictorial ersatzism. Under pictorial Ersatzdom, ersatz worlds are like pictures or models that are similar to that of the concrete world, just that they are abstract. Lewis's objection is that when this is fully developed, it simply becomes a version of modal realism, his theory, and therefore it can't be better than his theory or avoid the same problems because it basically just becomes his theory, or a version of it. Magical Ersatzism is primitive and represents the concrete world in virtue of its nature to do so. Now, Lewis objects to this version of Ersatzism by saying that magical Ersatzism, that the connections between the concrete world and the magical ersatz world under magical Ersatzism is just that. It's magical because it cannot be explained why they are happening. Now, I would say that Lewis has very good objections to magical Ersatzism and to pictorial Ersatzism, but I'm not sure that he fully succeeds in completely getting rid of linguistic Ersatzism. This theory follows so much better with how we view common sense, and I just think that Lewis is mistaken in how many possible worlds there can be, and also that he's probably mistaken in thinking that just because it's primitive doesn't mean that it can explain everything that it needs to.